live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and blasttheradio.com. This is The Lowell Green Show. The number to call and be heard around the world is 613-413-2217. Or email Lowell at blasttheradio.com. And now, here is Lowell Green.
Thank you, John. In his running or announcing that he was running for prime minister, Pierre Poilievre says the time has come to remove the overwhelming control that government has assumed over our daily lives and return that control to individuals. Return the control to you, John, and to me. Wow. You know, he's hit the nail on the head. The whole idea of the truckers' protests and other protests and they're demanding freedom, it's sort of been circulating in my mind. And I was having difficulty pinning it down, exactly what this was all about. But Pierre Poilievre has done it. Wresting control from government and returning it to you and to me is key. That's what's behind the burgeoning protest movement across the country and protest movements, in fact, that are spreading to other countries. Think of it. And I've spent half the night thinking about this. It just, for some reason, it just never sort of clicked in. The amount of control, incredible control, that government has assumed over our daily lives. Think of it. Think of it. During the past 2.5 years, government has taken control over almost every aspect of our daily lives. Government dictates what businesses will remain open, what businesses will close, what businesses can sell, what they cannot sell. They dictate where you and I must shop. They control our weddings, how many people. They control our funerals, how many people we can have. They control whether we are allowed to go to church and how many can be there. It's unbelievable the amount of control. They tell us whether we can go to a movie. They tell us whether we can go to a hockey game. They tell us whether we can have some friends in for lunch. They tell us whether we can have friends in for anything. The government tells us whether we can travel, where we can travel, how we must travel, the kinds of restrictions that we must undergo in order to travel. They tell us whether we must wear a mask, whether our kids can go to school. It goes on. It's unbelievable, John, when you start to think of the control that we have acceded, that we have given to government. Then whether it was justified, that's not the issue. The question is, has the time come, as Pierre Poilievre says, to seize at least some of that control back for ourselves? You know what? There was a time, and John, you may have some similar stories. We had a very close family member, and we would go over to her house for haircuts. 2 or 3 members of the family. We had someone that would come. She wasn't allowed to open her salon, so she would have. So I think the restriction was there only supposed to be 5 people. But at any rate, this family member, get this, John, was very, very worried about having too many cars parked in her driveway.
Sure.
She insisted that we drive one of the cars around the block. Why? She was afraid that if there were more than 3 cars in the driveway, that a neighbor would call and report her. Well, I mean, just think of the control that we have given up when we are afraid to have too many cars. And I never thought of it in those terms before. But it's unbelievable. I mean, it's almost like a fascist state when you're afraid that the neighbor is going to report there are too many cars in your drive. But that's a fact. I'm not making that up. That had happened. And I'm going to tell you, if it happened in our family, I'll bet you there are plenty of other families where it happened as well. Unbelievable government control that we gave up. Now, maybe we had to. That's not the issue. There's hardly any aspect of our daily lives over which government did not and does not still have control. Whether you agree with the truckers' protest or you do not, that's irrelevant. But I think you have to agree that at least they have the freedom part right. They may not realize exactly what freedom they are talking about. Maybe some of them do. I don't know. But they've got that right. It is a matter of freedom. Freedom to wrest some of the control away from government and take it back. Whether you agree that we had to give up that control, I don't think that's the issue. Today, let's deal with the issue today. The question is, do we still need all of this government control? Or has the time come to return some of the control over to us? Some of the control back to us, the people whose lives are controlled. In other words, has the time come to take control over our daily lives from government and return it to you, John Milkey, to me, and to all of our viewers and listeners? Has that time come? Is Pierre Poilievre correct? Are you and I, here's the issue, and you got to think about this. Are you and I adult enough, responsible enough, wise enough, educated enough to decide for ourselves whether we want to wear masks, whether we want to attend a crowded arena, whether we want to see a movie? Are we wise enough, adult enough? Are we wise enough to decide whether we want 100 people or 200 people for our grandchildren's wedding? Are we adult enough to decide whether our children should go back to school or we must leave these decisions up to government? That's the question. And it's a major it's a key question today. If your wife wants to work out at Movade, the local gym, should she be allowed to make that decision for herself? Or does she need government to do it for her? If you want to have a big Valentine's party next week, 50 people, 60 people crammed into your house, should you have the right to make that decision yourself, or do you need the government to make the decision for you? Pierre Poilievre says the time has come to return control of our lives to us, the people, you and I. Truckers say exactly the same thing. Whether you agree with them or not, we're talking about freedom. Freedom to make our own decisions. Freedom to decide for ourselves whether we're prepared to take the risk of having dinner next to somebody who may not be vaccinated. Should that be our decision? Should we be allowed to take that risk? Should you or I be able to decide for ourselves whether to get vaccinated? Or should the government make that decision for us? Freedom. Freedom to live our own lives, make our own decisions, make our own mistakes. Freedom to decide for ourselves whether to go to church, even though the church may be jammed. Freedom to decide whether, a relative's going to have a big funeral, whether we're going to have a big family dinner. Should we have the right to make those decisions? There may have been a time when we had to cede some of this control to government. That's not the issue. The issue is today. Today and tomorrow. That's what we've got to deal with. Today and tomorrow. And if you think government should still have control over our lives, how much longer are you prepared to live with that? Forever? There's no question that some people are quite pleased to turn over control of their lives to government. Then they can blame it and whatever happens on somebody else. It's not my fault, etc., etc. I mean, we have had millions of people live under dictatorships, a government making all decisions. I mean, you know, more than 1 billion people lived in the Soviet Union when essentially government was making all of the decisions, including, whether you could own land or what you were going to plant in your garden, and in many cases whether you lived or died. And people put up with it. They didn't like it. They existed with it. They lived and died. And when communism was finally banned, there were all kinds of people who still were really sad to see communism go in the Soviet Union. I just throw that out as one idea. Has the time come, in your opinion? Are you are you ready to take back your life, make your own decisions, or do you think we still need government to do it? Got to give it some thought because it means your position on vaccines. I know that many of you thought that we should force people to have vaccines. Well, I, I never. I mean, I've done everything I can to encourage people to take vaccine, no question about it. But I mean, it was impossible to suggest that government should force everybody to have a vaccine. What are we going to do if you're not going to take a vaccine? Throw you in jail and force it, drug you and then inject you? So are we ready? Because if we're going to make the decisions ourselves, here's one of the problems. And I was talking about this with someone actually this morning and this very thing, and said, well, you know, this person admitted that they themselves felt capable of making these decisions, but that were worried that there were other people out there that weren't. But my response was, well, look, we know that there are going to be people on the highways who are going to drive irresponsibly, but we don't tell everybody you can't drive because a few are going to drive irresponsibly. The people are out there. We know some of them are going to make mistakes, but we have to live with that. What's your view? Has the time come to take control over our daily lives, take it back from government? Is it time to return it to you? Can you handle freedom? That kind of freedom. John, any response so far?
Huge response. And if I can just weigh in, I had a very tough weekend. A lot of things bouncing around in my head and trying to make sense of all of this. And I'm someone who has a hard time dealing with anxiety. And so I really need to take time and really sort things out. And the question I kept coming back to is this whole question of freedom that they keep yelling and screaming about in this protest. And my question would be, well, when I look at the Constitution of this country, when I read it, and I'm no legal expert, but when I read it, and I have several times in the past few days, exactly what freedoms do you feel have been taken away? Every conclusion that I came to just vanished with your opening remarks today. Thank you, Lowell, for putting that in exact perspective that I hadn't even considered. It's not a literal freedom feeling. It is government control. And you and I have been talking about this from the very get-go on the show. So let's lump into the kinds of things the government wants to impose on its people. It's looking after what we see and what we don't see on the internet. It's censorship of the internet. It is an overreach at every single turn. Yes, from me to everything you just said, and thank you so much for putting that in perspective. It's exactly what I needed to
Well,
hear.
it was hard, and it was actually, and I have to thank Pierre Polyev for. I must tell you that when I first heard him say this, that we've got to wrest control back from government and give it to the people, I was a little puzzled. I said, "Gee, that's kind of a strange thing to be running on." And then I began to think about it and said, wait a minute. Uh, he's got a point here. This is really what this is all about. And without realizing it, because it could very well be, John, that many of these freedoms were taken from us out of necessity. I'm not debating. That's a debate that
Nope.
historians will
I
have for
think
many years.
on that, you and I absolutely agree.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that nonetheless, whether it was justified or not, it happened. And the most startling thing was when I said, I guess what really focused me was remembering what happened when we went to get a haircut, and a
Mm.
family member didn't want us to park our car. I said, my God, we created a situation where a totally honest, hardworking person was afraid of having too many cars in her driveway for fear a neighbor would call. I said, "My God, what kind of a society did we create? Maybe it was necessary, but I don't think we want to live with that. I don't think we have to live with that. We've learned a lot. We've learned how to deal with COVID. Most of us have now been vaccinated, and not only that, but if you want to wear a mask, no one says that you can't wear a mask. We don't want government to say no, you can't wear a mask. So but should the decision be left up to you and I? But this idea, I'm glad you said this, that you hadn't realized, because to be honest, I hadn't really realized either when we were talking about freedom until you really began to focus on it. You're absolutely right. They took away our freedom to have a funeral, and took away our right to have, what, any more than five people at a wedding, or in many cases just took away the right to have a wedding. I could go on. I mean, that took away our right to go to a movie, right to play pool, to go to a dance, to go to a casino. I mean, they took away all of those rights. Those were rights. We had a right to go to church with as many people as we wanted. They took that away. Whether it was justified or not is not the issue today. The issue today is, do we need to continue with that? Or are we adult, wise, and responsible enough to assume those responsibilities? Knowing full well that we'll make mistakes, are we prepared to pay the consequences? John, let's, first of all, before we take response, shields. Now, when we're talking about responsibilities, I think that Shields is a very good example of this. They take their responsibilities very seriously. They've been in business. I know we have a lot of new listeners these days. Shields is a wonderful business located in Pakenham. Now you say, wait a minute, they're selling appliances out of Pakenham. Yeah, it's a small store, although there's a lot of stock in there, and a nice little butcher shop, but they have a huge warehouse and everything, virtually everything you could possibly want in the way of appliances. Every major brand, every color, every size, price range, wattage, consumption, etc. It's all there, and it's all listed in their website. Their prices, you can compare prices very, very easily. Go to Scheels, SCHEELS.ca. Have a look at the website. Just click on whatever it is. If you want a mattress, we always talk about appliances, but they sell a lot of furniture there as well, Matt. They've been in business. Now, I've said this before. The only way you stay in business in this community, particularly in the Valley, for a long period of time is you're doing business the right way. Shields does. John, what kind of response are we getting here?
A lot of people really appreciating what you have to say on this. Cheryl says, only place we get the true facts is from you, Lowell and John. Thank you. Christine says, with the current mental health crisis, what if the government decided that everyone with any mental health issues must take a specific medicine, or that they are not allowed to participate in society as they may potentially cause harm to themselves or others, or because they may overwhelm the medical system? There would be countrywide outrage. Or would they be, she asks. Carl says, give me liberty or give me death. Quote from Patrick Henry. Let me see. Scrolling up to Peter here, he says, Pierre makes 100% sense. We have, as Canadians, always gone along, and if you said something in front of someone, they go, oh, well, nothing we can do. Canadians, up to recently, didn't stand up and speak up. It took the convoy to get people's attention. Americans stand up and speak up all the time.
Can I address that? It's puzzled me, because there are a lot of people who object. I mean, there's no question. I wish that they would go home now, but that's a side issue.
I agree.
The kind of support that we've talked about that many times, John, and I think that people were saying, you know what, they may not have been able to sort of pinpoint the loss of freedom, but they said, you know what, like, nobody has said it. We've done everything the government has told us we had to do. There's never been many objections. We've done what they said. We followed we lost all of these freedoms, but finally, somebody is standing up. We may not agree with everything they say. We may disagree very vehemently with some of their stances, but God darn it, at least somebody is standing up and telling the government, you know what, enough is enough. And I think that's why it may have been a little fuzzy in many minds why they support this. But I think that's it. The feeling that, you know what, we've lost all of this. Everybody's done what the government has said, but here's a group that's saying no more. We've had enough. We want to be able to live our lives. That, I believe, is the major reason for the overwhelming and very surprising support. John, go ahead, please.
Yep, and it's big and it's loud and it's hard or impossible to ignore. And maybe it had to be just that, because a few of us standing on the hill, yelling and screaming and holding up signs would not have gotten the same attention.
Yeah, that's
But
very
I agree.
true.
I think it's time for them to go home. When they start
Oh yeah.
saying, hey, we're not mean people. We have bouncy castles. You're not a protest anymore. All right. Good afternoon, Lowell and John. This is a text at 613-413-2217. No matter what side of the convoy grievance anyone is on, the one thing it has exacerbated is a discussion around COVID and respective freedom. Even the pollsters are now on board with asking the nation where their respective comfort levels are. Kudos for all of this happening. I'm completely on the side of returning the freedom to the people to take on their respective risk tolerance. I
Good.
also think that even if this protest ends tomorrow, the respective governments will soon start to drop mandates of all kinds, but will never attribute their decisions to the conversations that have taken place because of these truckers. I am fully vaxxed, but it's time to move on. Thank you very much, says Brent.
Thank you, Brent. It's good. Some good comments. Yes. Um, John, we got some more. What's yeah.
Yep. Over to Facebook. Alice says, good example of what's happened to my granddaughter, whom is a bubbly, happy 11-year-old, has returned to school and has her 2 vaccines. But when it's her time for lunch, she removes her mask to eat and isn't allowed to speak at all on her lunch. I was horrified when I heard this. Mental health on our children is a crisis because of all of these mandates. I
Yeah,
feel
that's
for that,
that's
Alex.
that's you know
Yeah.
what, that's a very interesting comment. I mean, when I talked about how government has control, can you imagine that? Made people afraid to have too many cars in their neighborhood, and is now telling little children, still, government says the little children can't talk during lunch. Wow. Folks, think about that. You may be the greatest Trudeau supporter in the world. You may be the greatest Doug Ford supporter in the world. But telling children they can't talk at lunch? What the hell is that? I wasn't aware of that. Go ahead, John.
You must see it when you talk to your grandkids, and you must worry about, where their heads are going to be at in a few years. I look at my young nieces and nephew, and one of them should be enjoying her whole university experience, her first year. The others are, just like what, grade 2 and grade 4. They can't even play with their kids without being told, got to get your mask on. There's a thing, there's this nasty virus. They seem to me to be so antisocial. They're so afraid to talk to each other. I really am afraid for the long-term effects of this. So that's a great comment, and I really
You see,
appreciate that, Alex.
one of the things is, in my opinion, many of the restrictions that were imposed upon us were probably justified, at least to a certain degree.
Initially, absolutely.
But there's no question that some of the restrictions made no sense. For example, forcing restaurants to close, but allowing 200 people to jam shoulder to shoulder into an airplane. Closing the local restaurant, the local bookstore, while allowing people to jam into Costco. That never made any sense. So, but that's a different issue. But it's all, I think, sort of piled up here. It's all accumulated, and people are just beginning to say, "Wait a minute!" And now this latest, children can't talk at lunch. Folks, I don't care where you stand on vaccines or masks or anything else, but telling little children that they can't talk at lunch, that's freaking criminal as far as I'm concerned.
Scars them for life.
Stupid. And you know what? On top of everything else, it is goddamn stupid. And I don't know whose rule that is, but it's just one example of how when you let authority have control, most times they'll exercise the control responsibly. But there are always those who will exercise control in a stupid manner. I can't use a better word. And whoever's decision this is, whether it's the school principal, whether it's the school board, whether it's the province, whether it's the federal government, whether it's the health authorities, I don't know. but the decision to tell kids they can't talk at lunch is just freaking stupid. Go ahead, John.
Again, Lowell, we have more comments than we have time for. I will package these up and make sure that I send them to you via email because I know you're always interested in all the comments.
Good.
And I'm popping as many up on the screen as I can. So for the listener, please know that I'm doing the best that I can. And I don't censor it. If you post something, I get it up there. So Debbie says, I'm fully vaxxed and have gone along with all the rules. However, did not realize how suppressed and depressed I was until I went to check out Parliament Hill on Saturday. I went as this is history in the making, but I got such exhilaration for life again. Carolyn is next up on Facebook. She says, I let people into my house that are unvaxxed all the time. Paul says, there's no cure for stupid. Peter says, Ministry of Education and school boards in overdrive. Joshua on Facebook, telling children not to speak is indoctrination. If you tell a child not to speak, how do they learn to speak up? Glenn has said, goddamn stupid is the right use of language. Lori says, there's a debate right now in Parliament. They are yelling at each other. I'm so tired of the yelling. I've got no more tolerance. This is why we're at this bubbling over boiling.
But you know what, John? I understand that. But this is healthy. Until now, we have accepted with very little rebellion, very little backlash, everything that the government has told us to do, including don't let your kids talk. So what's happening now, finally, we're beginning to question. Finally, there's a backlash, okay? People are finally saying, you know what? Enough is enough. We can't continue with this forever. This is good. This is the first sign that we're not going to accept this kind of government control again. Good. I think it's very healthy. John, I know you don't like the yelling, but at least you know what? You're yelling, at least you're talking about the issue, because until now, it's just been accepted. Yes, the government says this, the health authority says this, Dr. Tam says this, so we got to do it. Well, finally, somebody's saying, wait a minute, hold it. Maybe we don't have to do all of these things. Go ahead, John.
I don't mind the yelling if it gets us to a point where we all recognize that needs to stop and we need to get back to having a conversation.
Absolutely. No question.
I'm all about that middle ground. That's all I want. Can we please find that damn middle ground? It ain't going to be perfect for everybody, but Never. It's going to be a happy middle ground. Text 613-413-2217. Yes, Lowell, we are a nanny state. Yes, we want control back. The Liberals love big government and help it along by bringing in people by promising them free handouts in order to get their votes and give up their rights. Billy says, poker at my house every week for the last 2 years. 25 to 30 people, no issues. Take freedom into your own hands. Susan says, people are tired of getting walked on. Taxpayer stupidity. So true, Lowell. The control is ridiculous. Let people live. Terry says, time to get rid of Tam, finally. Leanne says, I've turned him off. She can't be talking about you because that's your daughter. So, well, maybe. I don't know.
No.
Terry says Candace Bergen rocks. Here's Lynn saying, saw this morning a video of a Romanian woman crying and begging a trucker not to leave. This woman had so much fear about losing her freedoms. Kate, regarding children being told not to talk to each other. Yes, this is true. She says, my 9-year-old daughter said while they're eating lunch, they play them some cartoons so they don't talk to each other. She is the kid who absolutely loved to go to school until last year. She says she's afraid to say something because she doesn't see others' facial expressions, and so she isn't sure if they're laughing with her or at her.
Well, see, this is just one example. I know I've dealt with this before, but it's one example of how, in some cases, these so-called experts, the people in control, really aren't capable of being in control. I mean, whoever makes these decisions should not have the right to make a decision for anybody else over anything. Anybody that would tell a 9-year-old kid that you can't talk at lunch, that person making that decision should not be in a position to have control over anybody. Go ahead, John.
Leanne is back in to say that she has stopped listening to CFRA. Okay, here you go. Craig says they're yelling at each other because the Liberals refuse to answer a question. Wow. Everybody who is shocked by that, please honk your horn. Here you go. Barry at 613-413-2217. Lowell, the Liberal government wants to control our lives according to their ways and not let us have our own lives the way we want it to be. They have never had our best interest in their minds. Trudeau wants to make a law that everyone has to write left-handed.
Yeah, but wait, let's just be very fair here. Many of these restrictions are imposed by the provincial government, and that holds true right across the country. So we're talking about, as I say, it could very well be, and probably was, that many of the restrictions made sense and probably were necessary. The question is, has the time come to give us back control over our own lives? But you can't blame it all on Trudeau, because we all fell into the trap, folks. We really did. We just willingly gave up control over our lives, or many of us, most of us did. Go ahead, John.
Masks don't protect against the virus unless it's an N95. This whole mask debate mandate is just a comfort thing.
Let's not get it. That's yesterday's, last century's argument. Let's deal with the issue today. Are we prepared? Are you prepared, Lisa, to accept the freedom and its consequences? Because some of the consequences may very well be more people in hospital. Are we prepared to do that? Go ahead, John.
So let's go back to the very beginning of the comments as they started flowing in. Our rights should never have been taken away, says Kathy. I'm so proud of my fellow Canadians right now, adds Robert. Tammy, Trudeau works for us, not us for him. Caroline says the loony left don't like Pierre. Anne says Watson is ridiculous. Both he and the police chief look ridiculous in all of this. And Trudeau, the no-show is absolutely pitiful. Liberals not reading the room. Lynn says...
By the way, sorry, we're right out of time.
No worries.
Just thank you all very much. And before we go, I just want to say this. Got nothing to do with our topic today. Don't believe a lot of the garbage that was beginning to show up concerning Pierre Poilievre. It started again. Some woman, I have no idea who she is, claims that she's had many run-ins with that evil man, Pierre Poilievre. Well, I check her out. This woman doesn't even live in Ottawa, probably has never met, but this kind of crapola is going to show up a lot, folks. Just be prepared for it. Thank you all. We'll be back tomorrow.
The Lowell Green Show is seen and heard live around the world at 2 p.m. Eastern. Connect with us online at blasttheradio.com/Lowell Green. Can't join us live? Download the Lowell Green podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, Google, and more. Ask your smart speaker to play the Lowell Green podcast. This is a production of blasttheradio.com.